What was your "we need to leave now" moment? I was traveling alone in Bangkok, taking a tuk-tuk, open-air taxi somewhere. A common scam I'd been warned of was for drivers to make a stop somewhere and basically lock you in a shop until you bribe your way out. My driver started asking if I was doing any shopping and suggested we stop at his cousin's store. No thanks. He starts begging, "Please, you'll really like his store." More emphatically, "No thanks, take me to my destination." He says we're just gonna stop there quickly on the way. So I just waited until he stopped at a red light, then got out and walked away. He was screaming at me to come back, but he can't exactly leave his tuk-tuk in busy traffic. Nah, sister, don't play those games. I had to do this in India. Dude took us to a shop, then he needed to go to the gas station. We were just sitting there for a hole when we got out and found another ride. Pretty sure he was going to make us pay for the gas. We didn't feel unsafe per se, just taken advantage of. Several years ago, we had a bit of a flood during spring after a period of intense rain and rapid snowmelt. Me and my dad were on one of our favorite nature trails when we observed a river that had formed alongside the path and carved out a ravine. Across the ravine, I could see a large tree had fallen after the ground beneath its roots had been washed away. There was another large tree along the bank that looked very vulnerable as its roots were already becoming exposed. I commented that it would likely fall before the day was over. We stood there for a few seconds longer and I was fixated on the tree swaying from side to side. Then the tree suddenly went still and I had this absolute primal fear take over and started screaming to run. As we fled, I could hear it come crashing down. It struck exactly where we had been standing. Later, I learned that large objects falling towards you don't often appear to be moving. I'm certain that the tree must have already been falling and I had some sort of subconscious awareness of it. This is true. I was pulling tree with rope to get it started falling. And when it started to go, I couldn't tell, and I felt like I needed to give it a few extra pulls. The whole time, everyone else was waving me off. Lol. Husband, then boyfriend, and I were living in Oakland at the time, and were catching a Sunday evening BART train from the Fruitvale station into the city for a concert. While we were waiting on the platform, noticed two shady-looking dudes scoping us out. One appeared to be signaling to a third guy standing alone a long way down the platform. When the train pulled up, we stepped onto the car directly in front of us and sat down in the front row, immediately beside the two ADA seats that faced the door's open area in the center of the car. Shady dude and his buddy get onto the same car shortly after us, even though they'd been standing closer to another car. Shady dude sits down in the ADA seat directly beside me, his knees nearly touching mine on a near empty train. His buddy sits down in the second row of seats, immediately behind my husband. Already the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up and my cortisol levels are spiking, but I try to talk myself down internally and tell myself I'm just being paranoid. Moments later, the third guy I suspected Shady dude had been signaling to, who'd been standing way down the platform, stepped onto the same car but remained standing and started looking up and down the car in both directions like he was assessing the other passengers. In a split second of panic, I placed my hand firmly on my husband's knee, turned to him and looked him square in the eye and said quietly but firmly, "We need to get off this train now." Bless his heart, to this day, he didn't hesitate or question me for even a second. We stood immediately and walked briskly through the train car's doors, only a second or two before they shut behind us. So close. If there were any doubts remaining in my mind, they were immediately erased when the shady dude instantly sprung out of his seat and came charging toward the closed doors as the train began to pull away, making eye contact with me the whole time, and then proceeded to walk down the center aisle of the train car as it pulled away, keeping pace with us and continuing to lock eyes with me for the next few eternally long seconds until the train accelerated down the platform. The train goes into a dark tunnel immediately after leaving the Fruitvale station, which was also a total dead signal zone. I knew in my gut that shady dude's hands would have been on me, and his buddy would have had a knife to my husband's throat the moment we entered that tunnel. Only God knows how that would have ended. Shook me to my fucking core. I can still feel the adrenaline surge in my veins just thinking about it, over 10 years later. And I'll always be grateful I married the guy who didn't even blink when my gut instincts took over. I was young and dumb. I lived in rural Maine for a few years, and I liked hiking alone out into its wilderness, particularly to a little stream that I liked sitting beside while I doodled in my journal. I never told anyone I was going, never carried weaponry with me, generally unwise choices. Anywho, I was out there one day and suddenly felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I felt a kind of terror I'd never experienced before in my life, nor since. I'm unsure how to describe it. It felt like my mind was receding into a mindless panic, and I had this terrible urge to run. I kept trying to calm myself down. I looked around, saw nothing, told myself it was my imagination, and I was fine. But then I realized the forest had gone completely and utterly silent. The birds and squirrels had hushed, the frogs didn't make a sound, even the insects seemed to have stopped. It was such an eerie, deafening silence, aside from the stream burbling beside me. But I knew at that moment, no, it wasn't in my head. If all the animals went silent, there was something dangerous nearby. So I got up, and it was so hard not to break out in a run. My body felt like it was going to bolt at at any moment and like I was just barely hanging on to self-control. I turned around and walked backward down the trail. It was a 2 or 3 minutes, felt like forever, and I was a decent ways down the trail when I finally saw it. There was a cougar crouched in the underbrush and it was following me. It was doing that thing cats do when they're honed right on in on you and they don't blink and slowly creep along. I started talking at it while I continued to reverse walk up the trail through the forest. Obviously I survived, but that was a wake-up call for me, and I never went into the forest alone after that. In hindsight, I realized it was likely a juvenile that hadn't been away from its mom long and hadn't yet mastered the art of full concealment, or that humans aren't supposed to be targets. It was such a beautiful animal too, but God, I'd never felt such a primal, instinctive terror like that before. I'm glad I left, and I'm glad I didn't succumb to that overwhelming urge to run. Not me, but my mother. I was 18 months and she was heavily pregnant with my sister at the time. Our washing machine had been playing up and mom was holding me as she went to see how the laundry was going. She opened the door and the floor was covered in water, not enough to flood into the hall, but had formed a big puddle. My mom, with me in her arms and heavily pregnant, said she went to step through the water and see what was going on, but something in her mind told her to stop. She closed the door and called the plumber. The plumber arrived and called an electrician who immediately turned off all power. The wiring had shorted, and there was a live wire sitting in the water puddle. Had my mother stepped in it in bare feet too, this was Australia, she would have been stepping in enough voltage to kill her, and I guess me, as I was in her arms. There was nothing odd about the water, other than it being all over the laundry floor, but I'm glad my mother followed her instincts and didn't step in it. She very likely heard something she didn't register. Live wires in water can often have this very quiet, low hum. Probably not something she'd have consciously heard and gone, that's a weird noise, but something her brain picked up on and could only say, danger, get away. I wouldn't be surprised if those instincts are heightened on pregnant women and new mothers. When I was a kid, I saw a guy pushing his broken down car, so I gave him a hand to push it. He then proceeded to smash the grill open with a screwdriver to get the bonnet open, and that is when I realized I was helping a car thief. Got out of there real quick. That is almost funny that he let you jump in like that. The guy probably thought he was meeting his new best friend for life. About 2 months ago, I'd stayed up past my usual bedtime, and as soon as I got in bed, I smelled something odd and was hearing some inconsistent banging and clattering from downstairs. I don't live in a great neighborhood, so none of this was unusual, but I got out of bed to check anyway and saw flames licking up the side of the building. Yelled at my wife to get out of bed and threw on some clothes, and we hightailed it out. Our building has a shared wall with the next, and that one had an apartment on the ground floor, fully engulfed by the time we made it outside, ended up condemning the whole building. I was the first one to call 911. Have been jerking myself awake in the night pretty consistently since then. Where's the smoke detector? Since the fire started next door, they won't be on the same system, and it likely hadn't reached one in their building yet, even if the building is fully connected. My cat was lying on my shoulder like normal. Out of nowhere, he bit me and ran to the bedroom door. I was confused and a little upset. Opened the door, smelled smoke, microwave was on fire. Good cat. The reason the cat knew was because he set the fire. Less good cat. Walked into a dive bar in western Pennsylvania to see a woman in a white dress with a blue flower in her hair and made a comment. She must have just gotten married to my group. No one believed me. Got up from her table to use the bathroom, and when I came back, she was all over a couple guys in our group who confirmed she was celebrating her elopement. I immediately know this is going to end badly, so I make multiple comments asking where her groom is. She eventually moves on to other groups, keeping up the same shenanigans. Groom eventually comes into bar, sees her doing this to multiple parties. He sits down and starts punching himself in the head. Immediately I tell my group, we need to get out of here. Someone's going to get shot. Right as I say that, the bouncer grabs the groom and throws him out. Bride and her party follows. Tell everyone to hold off until they are out of the parking lot. Not 3 minutes later, a crowd rushes in screaming someone got shot. The bride shot and killed her own niece, the only family member that witnessed her wedding. Always trust your gut. I was alone and driving to work in my Dodge Omni. Suddenly started feeling sleepy and dizzy and a tad bit sick. I realized just in time after almost nodding off twice that I was huffing exhaust fumes because my exhaust pipe broke directly under where I was sitting. I immediately had to pull over and get out and call my parents to take me the rest of the way to work while they towed my car. I still think about how many ways that could have ended. Very, very badly. I was at a party and had too much to drink. The owner of the house let me sleep in the den while everyone else continued to party. There were a few times he opened the door to check on me. It felt like he wanted to see if I was asleep. It made me feel uneasy, so I left discreetly and drove home drunk. He ended up raping a female friend of his later that year. She got drunk and passed out at one of his parties. My husband and I were at a 24-hour art festival that we attended every year. Around 10:45 p.m., we noticed a bunch of people arriving and changing the vibe. We both decided to get out of there immediately. A few hours later, there was a mass shooting. 18 people injured, the shooter killed. Art all night 2018? That was such a tragedy, both for the families and for an event that was a boon for a city that was beginning to seem safer. It hasn't been the same since. I knew a few other people there, glad you got out safely. Was on Bourbon Street in New Orleans some years back. About 11:30, the vibe had changed. People responding angrily if someone bumped into them when before everyone was just like, no problem. Bouncers throwing people out into the street, literally onto their faces. I said, let's go. I'm not liking this. 20 minutes after we left, the shooting started. 9 people shot, 2 of them killed. Trust your gut, people. At a house party in college, some guy pulled out a katana and said, want to see something cool? That was my cue. Grabbed my drink, grabbed my friend, and said, we're leaving before this turns into a Netflix true crime special. Same. As soon as someone pulls out weapons or hard drugs, I'm gone. Whenever the birds get quiet, or if you're in the ocean and see all the small fish disappear, you fucking leave. If you're at the beach and the water recedes so far back that fish are flopping around, get as far away from there as you can. Last year, I called Lyft to pick me up from a bar. The car shows up and it matches the car on the app. I said the driver's name and he said it was him. Before I got in, I went around the back to check the license plate. It did not match the app. I told the driver his plates didn't match and he told me to get in anyways. I said absolutely not and he sped off incredibly fast. Never ask the driver's name. Always ask who they are there to pick up. I was sitting in the parking lot of my then boyfriend's apartment complex with him smoking a joint at night. He had just gotten a used BMW that was in great condition. The neighboring apartment complex housed many known gang members he grew up with, but had to part ways with due to their lifestyle. One gang member in the other complex had the same BMW as my ex in black. My ex's car was not black, but it was dark colored and looked black at night. I suddenly got a terrible feeling and said, I think we should go, to which he dismissed my concern. I didn't let it go and said it a few more times until I practically yelled at him saying, let's go right fucking now. I'm not playing games. And he reluctantly started to back out of the spot. 4 spots down, we noticed someone creeping in between other cars in the lot and had to pass him to exit the complex. The guy was holding a short-barreled AK-47 rifle. My ex called his old friends and asked them what the fuck was going on, and we found out that dude we saw almost killed us because he thought we were the guy from the other complex. Apparently the intended target had many close calls around that time as retaliation for his actions. My ex sold that car within a week. If you liked the video, I would be grateful for a like and a subscription.